Welcome to wesleygospel.com. I've been looking forward to doing this recording for a while. I have been doing a very slow read of a book called Reasonable Enthusiast by Dr. Henry Rack. And it is a history of early Methodism. And the reason why this book is so unique is that it's one of the few academic scholarly studies of early Methodism that actually covers the charismatic side of early Methodism. There is another book out there called The Supernatural Thread in Methodism that came out a couple years ago. I don't know how thorough it is. And I've referred to many times that there is a book out there that you can get self-published. It's called The Supernatural Occurrences of John Wesley, edited by Daniel Jennings. And there's a free PDF of that on Google as well. And he extracted all of the supernatural elements like dreams, visions, healings, casting out demons, etc., etc. All the charismatic experiences that John Wesley recorded in his journal over the course of his life. He pulled it all out and put it into one convenient 200-page volume. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarize what Dr. Rack went over in this section on reasonable enthusiast. The word enthusiast is the old word for charismatic. It's actually more of an insulting word. It doesn't really mean charismatic. It more so means charismaniac. It means to be filled with God, or to be filled with a God, or something, or somebody who thinks that they are filled with the spirit of a God of some type. So, casting the word enthusiast on a charismatic church was an insulting way of saying those people are probably full of the devil and they think that they're filled with the Spirit of God, or they're pretending, they're imposters, they're not really filled with the Holy Spirit. So it was an insulting word. It was an anti-charismatic insulting word that people used to use, and the Methodists were called enthusiasts, the Quakers were called enthusiasts, and Wesley was called an enthusiast. But here, Dr. Rack is supportive of Wesley. Dr. Rack is a charismatic himself, I think, a Wesley scholar, and he is in England now. He is one of the curators of the old Methodist libraries up there in England now, and you can actually email him. His email is available. You can contact the guy. He one time sent me a pamphlet he put together on the primitive Methodists, which was a very charismatic dreams and visions sort of a group that branched off of the Methodists in the early 1800s, and came to form Wesleyan Methodism later on, which was important in the development of the holiness movement. Dreams and visions play a really important role in charismatic Methodism, in the charismatic side of Methodism. Methodism was a charismatic movement. It was the main charismatic movement. There were other charismatic groups in the 1700s in England, but Methodism was the leading one. They were the leading one. They were considered the one that was the most seriously considered, because their orthodoxy and being connected with the Church of England, and the Puritanism. The section that I'm going to be speaking out of starts at page 420 in Reasonable Enthusiast and goes all the way until page 436. So this section is called Piety and Providence, the Religious Experience and the Supernatural World. One of the things that really comes through in this study is that the main object of study is, number one, the Journal of John Wesley, and number two, the lives of the early Methodist preachers, the lives of the early Methodist missionaries. And if you really wanted to see the footnotes, but I think there was a collection of books. It was called The Lives of the Early Methodist Preachers. That's what it was called. And so, just the title of that book alone is comparable to Butler's Lives of the Saints, right? So we're not talking about the lives of Catholic saints, we're talking about the lives of Methodist preachers, but the terminology is similar. And so you're going to find a lot of the charismatic aspects of these guys' lives in these biographies of these Methodist preachers. And you're mainly looking at dreams and visions as the main charismatic things because of the instructive element that came with them, the faith increasing element that came with them. So the hearkening towards the word hagiography and just the similarity towards the life of St. Francis of Assisi and the life of George Fox. George Fox's journal became a precedent to John Wesley's journal, and the Puritan biographies became a precedent. Grace Abounding, the Chief of Sinners, like by John Bunyan, became a precedent for these types of stories of these lives. Their conversion stories were important. That had nothing charismatic to do with them. So they would write their testimony out, how they got saved, what they were like before salvation. And so there was nothing necessarily supernatural about that. But when dreams and visions of Christ crucified or dreams and visions of the day of judgment came in, these were common experiences. This is mainly what they had dreams and visions of Jesus bleeding on the cross for them, or him sitting on the throne of judgment. And like they might be praying for assurance of salvation, and then as their eyes are shut, they have a vivid closed vision of Jesus bleeding on the cross for them. Or they might see him on the judgment day in a dream. That was the main thing that they saw. That was the most popular. I'm not saying that's the only visions and dreams they had, but that was just a very popular. It's hard to fight against that, right? From an evangelical point of view, it's hard to say, "Oh, that's just Satan masquerading as an angel of light." Why would that be Satan masquerading as an angel of light? I mean, you can't fight with that. And these would oftentimes happen at the actual conversion experience. People might be praying for assurance of salvation. Here's page 425. The actual conversion in a considerable proportion of cases was precipitated by some apparently supernatural experience, dreams, visions of Christ crucified, or the judgment day, voices or feelings which impressed particular biblical texts on their minds as divine guidance. One person prayed for it in the company with others and finally had a vision of Christ crucified by the eye of faith. Now, there's talking about their eyes are shut while they're in prayer, and they see a closed mental picture popping in their head of Jesus on the cross. The witness of the Spirit was a very important experience. That's where you feel the burning in the belly, and you feel God's love come from that. You feel assurance of salvation from that, and that was understood as Romans 8:16. And of course, in Luke 24:36, I think it is, where it says, "We're not our hearts burning within us." Well, we're not talking about our heart, or as an organ. We're talking about our belly. We're not our bellies burning within us. As he talked with us along the way, that was very important. Methodist experience. It was associated, and it was called the witness of the Spirit. And it was associated with Christian perfection. Christian perfection was not understood as attaining a state of absolute righteousness. Christian perfection was understood as perfection in the sense of a perfecting perfection, improvement, process improvement. So it was really Christian process improvement is what the meaning of perfection was. Christian improvement, Christian perfection. Say you're an engineer, right? And we have to keep on modifying a certain type of car. Every year we're going to make it better and better, right? So that's engineering perfection, right? We're in the process of perfecting this car every year, coming out with a better model, right? So Christian perfection was that's what it was. It was Christian process improvement through prayer, through devotional life, through prayer life, through especially experiencing baptisms in the Holy Spirit, and inward love baptisms. Romans 5:5, having the love of God shed abroad in your heart by the Holy Spirit. Feeling and sensing the Holy Spirit in you, burning in your belly, and giving you a desire to obey the Bible. Some of the very devout Methodist women would practice the presence of God and just walk in constant awareness of the presence of God all the time. The Christian perfection was marked by two experiences. Number one, breaking off sinful addictions. So that brought a degree of purity. So no more addiction to drink, no more addiction to whoring around, no more addiction to anything like that. And number two, no more addiction to cussing. So addictions were broken. Number two, the inward flame of the Holy Spirit in the belly, which brought a sense of universal love towards all of God's dearest creatures. We just love everybody. Of course, this can wear off. It has to be cultivated by a prayer life. So you can backslide from it, right? You can backslide from Christian perfection by losing your sensations of the Holy Spirit, which are brought about in a prayer life. So that's this really where the doctrine of backsliding got its sensibility. I mean, you can prove it scripturally in passages like Hebrews 6, Hebrews 10, 1 Timothy. But the real experience of backsliding was more a sense of losing awareness of God's presence, right? That everybody could relate to that. And so that's why that was so important. The doctrine of backsliding developed among these charismatic Methodists because they were feeling the Holy Spirit and they didn't want to lose it. They didn't want to lose that sensation, right? And that's why backsliding caught on as such a strong thing with them. Prayer, theology, and evangelism came to be viewed as way more important than business among those who were most devout. So business was to be maintained, but at the same time, prayer, theology, and evangelism was more important. Keeping a spiritual diary or spiritual journal of your progress was important, because if the Holy Spirit gave you something, He'd want you to write it down so you wouldn't forget it. Marriages were very seriously entered into because your spiritual life was more important than your marriage. And so people were not flippant. Methodists were not flippant about who they chose to be a mate. They were very careful about it. Made sure that they believed the same and that they lived the same as them. 431, page 431. Through many of the lives, indeed of all of them in various measures, there runs a more or less strong and overt sense of the supernatural world, divine and diabolical in its manifestations. So, people would have experiences of the Holy Spirit. People have experiences of angels and demons in their dreams and visions. And I'm going to talk more about this now. No. There was a decline in supernatural belief in the time of Wesley going on because it was the Enlightenment going on. Okay, so a lot of scientism, a lot of rationalism coming into England, but there were parts of England where supernatural beliefs were still very strong. The one area in England where it was the strongest was a place called Cornwall. Cornwall. And I'm going to look this up right now. Cornwall, England. Cornwall, England is located on the southwestern tip of the United Kingdom. It is southwest of Cardiff. And if you were to look at London, Cornwall is west of London. It is the extreme southwest tip of London. And so the towns that Cornwall involves are towns like Plymouth, Newquay, Falmouth. And that area was the most supernaturally minded area of the early Methodists because that place still had a lot of magic and witchcraft going on in the time of John Wesley. So you had a sort of a power encounters situation going there. A very John Wimber sort of a situation where in the time of John Wimber, when the early vineyard was getting started, and they would start some of these early vineyard missions in the foreign countries, there would be power encounters. And so John Wimber wrote a book about that called Power Encounters. And so a lot of the folk people in Cornwall were still hanging on to a lot of magical beliefs. There was a lot of witches in that area practicing folk magic. And so when the Methodist preachers came to that section, they were constantly confronted and challenged with the beliefs in the supernatural world. And so wonders in nature, what they called particular providences, which were coincidental events that God made happen to help the Methodist preachers, at times to save their lives and bring judgments on evildoers and scoffers. Dreams and visions and demon possession and exorcism and healing, divine healing, all came into play when the Methodist preachers were in the Cornwall region, because they were coming up against both black magic witches and white magic witches that had strongholds on those villages and those towns there. Wesley would record supernatural occurrences sometimes in his journal and publish it, and then he would sometimes put them in the Arminian magazine and publish it. Page 432 says some of his friends regretted the inclusion of such material in the journal, but Wesley defended them for apologetic reasons in a skeptical generation. One Methodist preacher named Thomas Olivers confessed that he was prejudiced against the miracles stories, but also records how he saw a ray of light resembling the shining of a star when his burden fell off. So he saw an angel sparkle. Thomas Olivers saw an angel sparkle, just like all these Catholic saints that I've mentioned in times past in my angel sparkle articles and podcasts. That's page 432 in Reasonable Enthusiast by Henry Rack. Particular providences was the expression that they used. Particular providences was the expression that they used for divine coincidences that would happen to these Methodist preacher missionaries to either bring evil upon their enemies or save their lives through a series of coincidences to make sure that they got out of dangerous situations. Because, when we're talking about towns in Cornwall being under the power of witchcraft, especially black magic, we're talking about probably lynching mobs and human sacrifice, people being egged on to do that sort of thing, kill the missionary. Rain-stopping miracles and rain-starting miracles by prayer was something that happened among Methodist missionaries. Sammy Hick, the blacksmith, agonized successfully in prayer to create rain. Page 433. Natural events in the natural world were oftentimes interpreted as signs from God, like comets and earthquakes and thunderstorms, either concerned as God's judgment on certain situations or just God talking and portending certain things. Prophecy and healing was not claimed very often by people, but it did happen. People were humble about it. Spiritual healing by prayer and exorcism of the demon-possessed did go on, but sensitivity about medicine was also present, and mental illness was also acknowledged as differentiated from demonic oppression. So there was sensitivity towards the medical sciences as well as prayer for healing. And the only way you can really get a genuine healing miracle is if you embrace medical science. Notice that the woman who touched the hem of Jesus' garment and got healed had already spent all of that money on her issue of blood to doctors. So oftentimes we have to understand that unless we embrace Luke the physician, who wrote both the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, will we be able to see the miracles of Peter and Paul in that book of Acts, understanding that we have to have both medical means at our disposal and prayer by healing, and not use one at the expense of the other, but to use all of the means available, and to really try to truly understand both of them to their fullest extent. One time Wesley's horse was hurt, and he prayed for it, and its feet got better. The devil, page 434, the devil and his demons afflicted the Methodists during their conversion struggles, and their visions and visitations seemed vividly to symbolize the struggle for the soul between good and evil powers. And indeed, Wesley himself believed in good and evil angels as agents of God and the devil. Page 434, visions and dreams were usually, though not always, distinguished by the recipients. Both were taken seriously, as they might convey warnings or foreseeings of death. Visions of the judgment of the world, in other words, visions of Judgment Day, of Jesus sitting on the throne, or of the individual, are quite common. But the commonest of all are visions of Christ crucified and bleeding for sinners. He appeared, said Thomas Taylor, to the eye of my mind, and standing just before me, while 10,000 small streams of blood seemed to issue from every part of his body. From the 1770s and occasionally earlier, a few of those seeking perfection had special visions of the Trinity seen in the distinct persons. This would happen when people were agonizing in prayer for assurance of the witness of the Holy Spirit, or things like that. Visions of judgment brought conviction of sin. Visions of the crucified Christ brought forgiveness and joy. Visions of the Trinity, a kind of beatific vision open only to the perfect in love. So when people were praying for either A, the witness of the Spirit, or B, Christian perfection, which are both Holy Spirit manifestations, that's usually when they would see these visions, closed visions with their eyes shut, or dreams. In Cornwall, that witchcraft-infused area, there were a lot of people that were into folk magic. So when they became Methodists, they hung on to some of their occult beliefs, and it took a while for them to be taught against it, for them to cast them off. When the Methodist preachers came in and did healing prayer and stuff like this, some of them thought that they were wizards because they had the power of God with them, and they weren't wizards, but it just goes to show how simple the folk were there. And finally, these occult people who were steeped in the occult in Cornwall had to be taught that some parts of the charismatic supernatural are fine, but other parts of it are not fine. And so, page 435, the Methodist supernatural world, officially at least, sanitized and scripturalized what was accepted. Dreams, visions, and healing were sanctioned. Demons were exorcised, but resort to charms and witchcraft were opposed. And so that lines up with Acts chapter 2, Mark chapter 16, and Deuteronomy 18. Charms and witchcraft are opposed, but dreams and visions and baptisms in the Holy Spirit are okay, and praying for healing and praying for demons to be removed are okay. And so all of that stuff was already understood by the witches, but the Methodists came and said, look, we're going to modify this, we're going to remove the charms, and we're going to remove the witchcraft, but you can continue to hang on to dreams, visions, and healing, which they were familiar with. It's just now we're going to hang on to dreams, visions, and healing. We're going to hang on to praying against demons, but we're going to do it the Christian way, okay? And so, but we're going to say no to charms and witchcraft. And so that's how the charismatic Methodist preachers were able to reach those people in witchcraft. It was a power evangelism, very much like John Wimber. Power encounters, very, very much like John Wimber in that sense. So we're meeting the New Age people where they're at. We have some common ground with them, right? But we're going to say no to the charms, and we're going to say no to the witchcraft, but we're going to hang on to the dreams, the visions, the praying for healing, and the praying against demons. Those things we will hang on to, but we will renounce charms and we will renounce witchcraft. And that's what Cornish Methodism was. That was the strongest charismatic Methodist group. It was in Cornwall, the south western tip of the United Kingdom, kind of right where the Plymouth town starts, and to the very end there. And that's all I have to share for now. God bless you out there. This is John with WesleyGospel.com.